What are the most common challenges that people struggle with? And how does mindfulness address these particular issues? Or how does mindful communication address those kinds of common issues?
I this is a wonderful question and it's a great place for us to start. I find as human beings we're a lot more alike and a lot more similar than we think. And I find that some of the most common things are uncertainty. People struggle with uncertainty, how to accept things that they cannot control, managing stress, conflict, and really being able to communicate their emotions and thoughts in a way that creates connection and not disconnection. Because sometimes there are thoughts or feelings we want to share, but they're difficult thoughts or difficult feelings, complex feelings, and we're unsure of how to communicate that in a relationship where there's a lot on the line or we really care about the person. So those are, I think, some of the most common ones. And I would say that mindfulness comes in because, as you know, Ryan, my background is in communication studies, interpersonal specifically. And that was the biggest gap I think I saw in interpersonal communication. There was like one tiny sliver in some chapter about this big about self-awareness. And then the more I taught it, I realized that's the component. In order for people to apply these tools, I need to teach them about themselves. I need to teach them how to be mindful and how to really expand on that. Because, I mean, really, what mindfulness is just three things. If I was to keep it really simple, it's presence. So, how to be here right now. So, the awareness, non judgment. So, being able to observe without evaluating everything. And then the last one is the acceptance of what we can control and not control. So, bringing that into our communication, it's just a world of difference. So I think that's those are the common obstacles, and I would say that's how mindfulness plays a part.
Awareness, non judgment, and presence. Of those three, which do you think people struggle with the most?
I would say the hardest part is the acceptance. It's accepting how much we cannot control in our lives. And for me, as someone who is a forever recovering perfectionist, very type A, that was one of my biggest lessons. As someone, you know how it is in academia, you have to be organized, you're the teacher, everyone's looking to you. Like my left brain is very strong, very developed. And when I started doing mindfulness, I realized that was a struggle for me. And I thought it was only me. But now, as I'm working with other people, as the one guiding them through this journey, it's the acceptance, the radical acceptance of so many things, of so much uncertainty in life, right? The only thing we can never really control is ourselves, our emotions, and self regulate. So I would say out of the three, that is probably the most difficult.
It sounds very familiar because we're surrounded by colleagues who share some of the same kind of perfectionistic afflictions as we sometimes find ourselves being guilty of. So I can certainly appreciate that. What's a common myth or misunderstanding that people bring to this conversation that they have to then unlearn or get past that kind of
Mm.
barrier?
I guess it's twofold. So when it comes to the mindfulness component, I think people they hear mindfulness and immediately they're like, "Oh, I can't meditate." Is the first thing they say to me. I can't meditate. It's not for me. And I have to expand their awareness that mindfulness is so much more than just sitting cross-legged and meditating. Like it's not that. So that's probably one of the first things I have to debunk about mindfulness is so much more than that. Let me expand your scope. And then when it comes to communication, that I think we get comfortable in saying, well, I'm just not good at X, right? Whatever it is, fill in the blank. When really communication is a learned skill. It's not like something that we're innately born with. It is something we have to learn and practice. And if you don't practice, you kind of lose it. So I think those are the two biggest things is understanding you have a lot more power when it comes to your communication skills than you think. You just have to be willing to invest the time and the energy in them.
I struggle with the motivation to do the practices that I know will benefit me. I mean, like going for the gym, for example, right? Sometimes I have just too much work, and that is not going to
Mhm.
happen because there's just too many competing priorities. So, what do we do to help make ourselves invest in these mindful communication practices?
My predominant audience are professionals and high performers. People, I always say, I'm dealing with people who are constantly changing their hats, right, of responsibilities. And that's the thing. I don't have time, but I want all the results of the thing. Right? And so I think there's also another misconception that this requires a lot of time. I'm not asking people to put in hours a day. When I begin with, especially people who are new to this, if I'm doing one-on-one coaching with them, or even when I do workshops and go into organizations, I'm asking for 5 minutes a day. And I joke around with people that there's data that tells me how long we spend in the bathroom now because of our cell phones, and we're there scrolling on the toilet when we shouldn't be. So you have 5 minutes. I know you do. No matter how many things you have going on, you have 5 minutes. And I really start with something small because oftentimes, Ryan, we're thinking that we need to commit this big time commitment when there's so much data that shows these small changes that you can do in 5 minutes create the change that you're looking for. Maybe not at the pace you're looking for, but if you're not willing to put in that much time, well, then you got to compromise somewhere. So I always just say, let's start with the 5 minutes. Let's build that habit, right? Like you said, it's like going to the gym. But once you get to the gym, you're never like, oh, I really regret working out. That was a terrible decision. Like we never say that.
What part of your work do you enjoy most and why?
No, that part's easy. I love the teaching component of my work, which is so odd because, Ryan, I don't know if you know my career background, but I bounced around in a bunch of different jobs. Like, I refused to be a teacher for so long. I was like, no, I don't want to be a teacher. That sounds boring. I'll do that when I'm going to retire. And then the universe had other plans, and here I am. So, the part I love most about my job is just the teaching component, whether I'm doing a training or a keynote or coaching or whatever it is, it's all teaching, right? And it's probably connected to the fact that I'm a forever student. And I think most teachers are like that we're always learning and always wanting to just have our knowledge expand. And then I just love to share that with people. And I didn't realize for a long time that my superpower, I guess you could say, and you may understand this being in academia, if anyone's ever read an academic paper or research, they're written in like another language, right? Not most people are going to be able to read them and understand them and extract the gems from them. And so I realized what I loved is reading that, reading the research, understanding how science and mindfulness are really starting to intersect and align with each other. And I love simplifying that for people and making it practical of this is how you can apply this to your life. This is what this means for you specifically. So I would say that's probably the part I love most. And then seeing that light bulb go off for people, and you see that their eyes light up, they're like, oh, that's that's the thing I've been waiting for. That's the tool I've been needing. And I just love the part where your students, your clients, whoever, they don't need you anymore. I think that's the best part because they've empowered themselves. And that's probably my favorite part of my job.
Where do you most often send people for resources to help them to develop this superpower of mindfulness?
This book literally changed my life was by Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now. I read it maybe when I was 20 years old, and it made me realize that we all have egos, and it made me understand what is the ego, how is that interfering in my life, how much of my life am I spending in the future versus living right now, how much do I hold on to the past. So it really gave me a perception and a lens to view my life in a way that I hadn't, because we live in a society that tells us everything's, plan for the future, save your money, plan this, plan that. So it's all about doing right now, but for the future. So that book, I always am recommending to people. It's not an easy read in the sense that you need to be very present while you're reading it. And I recommend people actually read it as opposed to listening to it. I mean, if you could see my version of the book, it has a bunch of, notes and highlights. I probably need a new copy, to be honest. But that book, I sometimes, when people are struggling with things like self doubt or perfectionism, I refer them to Daring Greatly by Brene Brown, because a lot of her research showed how much vulnerability, right, is actually connected to courage and not weakness. So that's another resource that I share with people specifically who are struggling with those things. When it comes to mindfulness, I mean, John Kabat-Zinn is a huge, a cornerstone of the mindfulness research and how it's come to Western society from Eastern teachings. So you can't go wrong with any of his books, but I believe the big one is, oh my gosh, I'm going to butcher it. Wherever you go, there you are, I believe is what it's called. Another great book that's very similar to mindful communication, honestly, is Nonviolent Communication.
Those are some fantastic sources. I wonder, what do you find most controversial about this work? Or what is your most controversial perspective in the work that you do?
I would say probably what makes my take most controversial is my approach to mindfulness. I am a very laid back person. And I find that with the mindfulness, it feels very not tangible to people when they're like, okay, well, what does that mean? Mindfulness, what does that mean? Is something I get a lot. So I think what makes my approach controversial is that I'm not trying to make people a monk, right? And I don't have this energy to me. And this is honestly something, Ryan, that was what's the word, like a deterrent for me to get into mindfulness work as professionally, right? Personally, of course, applying it to my life, but professionally, I thought, well, I don't fit what the mindfulness teachers look like out there right now. They're all so peaceful and they talk like this and everything is so zen. And I was like, that's not me. I say the F word. I am like outspoken. I make mistakes all the time. Like, so I think that humanity approach, where I have found ways just to make it very practical and tangible and say, just try this thing. I know mindfulness says this, this, and this, but just try this. Let's just focus on this bit. So I would say maybe the way I kind of chop it up and make it really small bites for people and say, okay, this is where you're at in your journey. Let's just worry about this one thing. Forget about the whole lesson, right? The bigger picture. Let's focus on the micro right now. And I just really bring that, again, casual humor. I just try to make it fun and relatable for people.
How do we know that people have specifically benefited and grown from this work? Because it sounds intuitively so good. It sounds like, oh, if I just do this, this, and this, is I'm going to have all these wonderful benefits. But how do we know? How do we measure it? How do we operationalize it?
Two things. Yes, there are ways to measure it because, or else we wouldn't have the science, right? There are definitely ways to measure it. I personally do things a little differently. I I don't measure things with my clients in a quantitative way. It's going to be more qualitative in the data, meaning it's going to be more intuitive, and I want you to see it in your life. So what I tell people is, there, because that's a question, well, how do I know when I'm mindful, or how do I know, like, as if it's a place that you're going to arrive, a destination, right? Siri's going to be like, you have arrived at your destination. I don't see it that way. What I say is, look, what you will know when you have more awareness, because you will begin to notice, and people in your life that you spend lots of time with will begin to notice that you respond differently to situations that call for you to show up. Let's say a trigger, usually in traffic, someone cuts you off and you're like, "Rah," and you rage, right? You're going to notice that maybe you don't do that as often. Ultimately, I believe that people are the best thermometers to see the change. You just have to be patient, and you're going to see it because you're not going to be as reactive and you're going to be responding more. And I also think that the people in your life are going to be like, wow, wow, Ryan, wasn't expecting you to be so patient. Oh, wow. So you will get feedback. And I think that's the best indicator to know that you become more mindful, more aware.
Awesome. I would love it if a family member, or my wife, or my kids said, "Oh, you're
Right.
so mindful today. I really like this." I really, I
Wow.
think that's a celebration point in and of itself when we get to that point. I love that. What's one piece of advice you would give people who are just starting out? People who, don't know where to begin, don't know that first, thing that they want to do. Someone who's just starting out, what is one piece of advice that you would give?
Take it slow. Don't feel like you need to become a monk overnight. Don't, or a monk at all. It's really about figuring out where mindfulness can be applied in your life right now, in this snapshot in time. And I think just focusing on the awareness piece is the biggest piece because I always have people start there. How can we have any change occur if you are not aware of our current patterns and things that we want to change? So really, a lot of journaling is helpful. Automatic journaling, just in the morning, just literally spilling your guts on a piece of paper and not thinking about it because you'd be surprised of what comes out, or just observing your thoughts. Sometimes what I'll have do with clients is just making a list of tell me everything on your mind right now, like a to-do list. Just make a list, bullet points, and go through it, and then mark it up. How many of those thoughts are in the present? How many are in the future? How many are in the past?
That's such sage advice. I love that. What's the most important action that people should take today to develop this skill? Because you just gave an amazing list of things that people need to know, people need to do, people need to live. But what's just one action that they can do today?
I would say the most important action is the pausing, the mindful pause in our day. We have become just human doings, not human beings. Really think about how often do you take the time to be without any agenda? You're just existing. It's very rare, right? We don't find value in that. We put so much value on productivity and getting things done. And so I would encourage everybody to find just 5 minutes, 2 minutes even, to set an alarm. What point in your day is most stressful? Is it the late morning? Is it midday? Is it right after you come home from work? And that's where I want you to embed those 2 minutes to just either breathe or think about, okay, now I just got home from work. I'm feeling a little blank, filling it. Identifying our emotions, Ryan, can be so simple. Just saying, I feel stressed, I feel anxious, I feel whatever it is. And then breathe through that and think about, again, remember the to do list, the to be list, I think is one easy thing anyone can incorporate in their day to just start building some more awareness. And there's this crazy statistic that talks about, I believe it was Dan Gilbert and Matthew Killingsworth, two Harvard psychologists, did a study about the wandering mind. And they found that our minds wander about 47% of the time. So that means you are missing 47% of the time with your kids or your loved ones, or when you're with your friends, on vacation or whatever it is. We're missing so much of our lives. So if we can start being intentional of how do I want to be tonight while I'm at home with my kids for the next 3 hours? What is that? And choosing that one emotion or whatever it is we want to be with intention, I think can really start to create some change, some positive change for the listeners.
Melanie, thank you so much for sharing this wisdom and these important practices about mindful communication. Where can our audience find you online?
Oh my gosh, they can find me at melaniewhitney.com, and there they can see the different types of training, online courses, coaching, basically the services if they're interested in working with me. They can also book a free clarity call. I have a free resource to help people kind of understand where am I in my journey. So it's a little exercise, a little free download. It's called the Levels of Life chart, and they can do it by themselves. And if they want some help interpreting their chart, they can book a free call with me and we go through it together. And it's really just a nice way of being like, oh, this is kind of the obstacle that I'm experiencing in my life. So I would recommend people go there if they want to connect with me more. And of course, there you can get on a newsletter that I do monthly. You can also Instagram, LinkedIn, all the TikTok, all of it. I'm there. I'm there. You can find me and get some daily content and just engage, ask questions. I'm always answering questions there. I love answering questions, right, Ryan? We're teachers. We love to answer questions. It's part of our job. But anyway, yeah, that's where they could find me. And thank you, Ryan, for trusting me and having me on here. I love that you're providing this space for people to learn and to explore all the different topics that you're covering.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Melanie.